Hey everyone, my name is Jake Smeester. I'm the content creative specialist for Amazon Sumerian, and welcome to another episode of Sumerian on Twitch. And in today's episode, we're going to be looking at, oops, that's not the right slide, Sumerian updates. There's a lot of new updates. We actually just had a new release for Sumerian last night, and so we are, really excited about kind of some of the new things that are out there, and we just really wanted to talk about what is available and what this actually means for customers. So again, welcome to the show. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat room. I am monitoring right here and looking at those and want to answer anything that may or may not be relevant to what I'm actually talking about. So make sure you let me know what you're interested in, what you need to know. Okay, so again, like we mentioned, there was a new release yesterday, and so there's a lot of new stuff out there. I wanted to find the release notes. If you want to check out what is actually everything that was released, all the new bug fixes and known issues and supported VR hardware and AR hardware and all that sort of stuff, all platforms and what's supported and what is not, make sure you're checking out the release notes. Let me just show my screen. You can go here and there's a bunch of improvements, software, hardware compatibility, and all that. So make sure that you're checking that out, and because that goes out regularly. Let me post this in the chat room also to make it a little easier. Okay, and there we go. All right, so there's the release notes for this new release. All right, so the first thing that we want to talk about is what is new and what is unique. And let me look at the first thing, which is multi-select. So multi-select is the ability to actually select multiple entities in a few different places, in the entities panel, in the canvas, and also the assets panel. And so let's jump right into the editor and look at what that actually means. All right, so I'm here in the dashboard. I'm going to go ahead and create a new scene, and we'll just call this Sumerian updates. Okay, here we go. We are loading a new scene, and it's going to be an empty scene with just a couple lights and a camera. And here we go. All right, so this is going to affect a few different things. First of all, you can select multiple entities, take action on multiple entities with a few different actions. But it changes the camera controls, both for your mouse and your trackpad. I'll mainly just be talking about mouse because trackpads, of course, can be a little bit different depending on your settings. If you have a basic trackpad and however it normally correlates to a mouse, just think of it like that. Okay, so we're here in our empty scene. Let me just add in a few entities. A box. Let's do a cone. A cylinder. I'll just move these all just different spots. A sphere. Move that up. Okay, the first thing you might notice that's different is that whatever entity you have selected now kind of has this highlighted glow around it. That's actually indicating that it is selected there in the canvas. So that's part of it. And if I hold a shift and I start selecting multiple entities, you see that first of all, they are selected here in the entities panel, but they're also being shown that they're selected in the canvas. So if I keep adding to it, they are all selected. Now notice that as I can deselect entities by holding the Control or Command button on a Mac. As I do that, you notice that the position, the gizmo or the translation handle position changes a little bit. Hello, Rohan AWS 2020. Thanks for joining. As I select these different entities, the translation kind of location moves. That's because it's really just taking the average position of all the different selected entities. So as you add selections or remove selections, that is going to move. So because I have the translation or transform handles, I really should say, I can move those around. I can change it to rotation, and I can rotate these entities. Let me get that back. You see how they're both rotating. They're rotating on their local axis, not on the center axis. That's one thing that's important to note, especially for rotation. Another way that you can multi-select is by creating a bounding box. So if I just use my left drag on my mouse, I can create this bounding box and I can select multiple entities in that way. Now, one thing to note is that this changes the controls for your editor camera primarily with pan, because before, pan would be your left mouse button plus your shift key. That would allow you to just pan around. That has changed, and this is an important one, because shift is now allowing to create this bounding box. And so to pan, you got to hold down shift, alt, or shift option on a Mac. And so that allows you to do the pan up, down, left, right. You can also use your middle mouse button. So if you have a middle mouse, so I do in this particular mouse, and so I can use my scroll wheel or press down the scroll wheel, and I can pan that way. So that's another option. So that's multi-selecting the canvas. There's really nothing shocking about the entities panel, is that if you hold shift, you can select multiple entities and anything sequential. So if I select the box and then hold down shift and select the sphere, it will select everything in between. No big shocker there. That makes sense. I can unselect or deselect entities by holding down control. And I can re-add them by also holding control if I want to add individual entities. There's some other things to keep in mind too, is that with the arrow buttons are kind of have some newish controls too. So I can move up and down within the hierarchy using my up and down arrows. My left arrows can be used to expand or collapse parent entities. But once it's expanded, it'll just skip the child entities and jump to its sibling entity. That's one thing to note. But you can use those controls using your mouse. Multi-select is also available in the assets panel. So if you want to select multiple assets packs, you can do that. You can, as we mentioned before, you can change the translation of multiple entities. Translation meaning, I keep saying translation, which is true, but what I mean is transform, which encompasses translation, rotation, and scale. So you can change all those using the handles in the canvas. Notice, however, that the inspector panel is disabled when you have multiple entities selected. And so really what you can do, the actions that you can do on multiple entities is change the transform. Also, you can delete. If I want to delete multiple entities, I can do that, which is very, very helpful. So I'm excited about that. You can delete multiple asset packs or multiple assets too. But the thing to keep in mind is that when you do that, there's more dependency issues with assets because asset packs can be kind of used differently, or not differently so much, but assets can be used in a lot of different places. And if they're being used or have a dependency somewhere and you try to delete it, it won't be able to delete it. So that's just something to keep in mind. Dependencies are always a thing, as they should be. Okay. So that is multi-select. If there's no questions regarding that in the chat, let's move on to the next one. So the next one has to do with, let me get that title up here, animations as assets. And animations as assets is an important feature, and there's some unique things about it that we want to point out. But what is it to begin with? So animations is typically, before this release in Sumerian, you can add in a model that has an animation. Now, if it has an animation, it comes a part of the model, but you wouldn't be able to share those animation files between different models or different assets. They're kind of locked in. So if you had an FBX file that had an animation on it, that's fine. It works. You can make some edits. But you really couldn't treat those animation files as assets particularly. Okay, so that has changed now, so that you can actually use animations as assets. So you can share assets. You can import assets independently of your FBX file, so they don't have to be all bundled together in an FBX file. So you can have two different FBX files. So let's look at how that actually works. I will jump back to my screen. Let's delete this cylinder. Let's add in a few different things. I'm going to add in a mannequin. These are some unique mannequin and a unique Christine entity. So just they're going to look a little bit different than we're used to seeing them. But where is it? Christine rig. Oop, didn't grab it. Okay. So I'm adding in two different models. One is a mannequin, one is the host Christine, and they both have numerous animations that can be accompanied them or be added to them. One thing to note is that they're both very similar rigs, and so you can't necessarily share assets or animations across assets that are rigged completely different. So if you have a human and a cat, well, the animations are going to be very different between those two different models, not too surprisingly. But between Christine and the mannequin, they're rigged very similarly, so they can share animations. All right, so let's add in Christine, and let's add in mannequin. They're going to look a little bit different. Oh, so you got to use the new controls. Now I'll move Christine over. There we go. Okay, so let's look at this. So right now, if you notice on Christine, the animation, there's no animations. It has an animation component, but it doesn't have any layers. It doesn't have any animation state files there, so like FBX files. So let's do something about that. Let's add in I'm going to drag in an FBX file that's called the Christine stand idle. So it's really just an idle animation. So let's see how this works. And I want to point out there's some unique workflows that you got to pay attention to. And so I'm going to be kind of pointing out different things. And it's important when you get into like working with animations. I'm not an expert in animation, so I'm going to give you a very kind of high-level overview of how this works and how to approach it. But there's some very detailed documentation I'll show you shortly on if you want to learn more about it. Because animation's not a simple system. It's not a simple thing. People dedicate their entire lives to doing animation, so it's not a simple thing. We, of course, try to simplify it as much as possible, but there are just some things you got to keep in mind that it's just it's a complex system. So just remember that some of these workflows are important to keep a clean scene or an organized scene that works and is you can navigate between your different assets. I'll explain what I'm alluding to here shortly. Okay, so you notice that Christine rig t-shirt, we'll just call her Christine, has the default animation layer, has the stand idle animation. So that's something I just dragged on there from my computer. So if I press play, you notice that she has an animation. The mannequin does not. You see, it's still in that T pose. I should have showed you actually what Christine looks like. She would look the same. She's in that T pose, no animation, just static. Whereas if I zoom in on Christine, you'll notice that she has this. It's a subtle animation, but it is an animation nonetheless. It's an idle, so just kind of standing there, breathing in and out. Okay. When I added that animation to Christine, what happened is that it went directly into the default pack. Right? So now that it's in the default pack, I can select the mannequin and I can open up its animation component, and I can't take this clip and add it directly. I have to add a new animation state, and I'll call this stand idle. And then I can take this clip, and this is where we are sharing animations as assets. So if I do that and I press play, now they're both having that idle animation. Okay. Another thing we can do here is that let's say that I want to do something different. I want to add in a running or jogging animation. So remember how I added the directly onto the animation component? I can also just drop an animation file into my scene and then use it that way. But there are some things, again, to keep in mind. So let's look at I'm just going to bring in a run jog animation. I'm just going to drop it here in the canvas or the animation at the assets panel. And you'll see how it didn't go into the default pack. It created its own assets pack. And you see the run jog animation here. So let's go back to Christine. And so instead of stand idle, I'm going to call it run jog, this state. And I'm going to take the run jog clip and add it over here. And if I press play, now she's doing a totally different animation. And the mannequin is remaining idle in its idle animation. Okay? All right, now there's some important things to keep in mind when it comes to different layers, because once you start layering animations, this is when it becomes a little bit more complex. It's when you're trying to combine different animations. Now, one thing, there are different types of animations, and again, this is not going to be a detailed tutorial. We are going to work on creating a much more detailed interview and tutorial with people that really understand this stuff really well. They can give you some really great advice on how to approach animations. But in the meantime, let's just look at a really high-level understanding of what is going on here. When I brought in that, well, let me back up. There are two different types of animations layers. There's an override and there's an additive animation. An override layer is like the main animation. It's like the go-to animation. It's going to squash all other animations and take precedence and priority over other animations. So if there are multiple conflicting animations, the override is going to override. No surprise there. The additive, on the other hand, is going to be an animation that can be added on top of or onto another animation. So you can start combining animations. But there's some restrictions on how you kind of switch between override and additive. So notice how, remember, I added in the run jog animation, and it came in here into the assets panel. If I select that and I go over here to the inspector panel, notice how the clip type says override. When you bring in an animation into your assets panel, it's going to be, by default, it's going to be an override animation. And at this stage, you cannot switch it. You can't change it from an override to an additive. And that's just the way it's going to be. Whenever you bring it directly into your assets panel, it's going to be an override. It cannot be changed. But let's say I want to bring something in that is, I want to use it as additive animation and not an override. Well, let's look at that. So the mannequin has this stand idle, there we go. Let's add in a new animation layer. So right now it's having the stand idle. Stand idle is a very simple override animation that you can start adding on other animations too, like other additive animations. And let's call this new animation layer, let's call it talking. If I could start spelling. And then see here, this is where we can switch it. From layer type, we can go from override to additive. And now I can drop in my additive animation state file here. One thing to keep in mind, if it's asking for a state file, it's asking for an FBX file. If it's asking for a clip, that means you can drag in a clip from your assets panel. So if it's asking for a state file here, a lot of times you actually want to drag it directly off your computer. And so let's do that. So I'm going to add in this a Christine talking additive animation. All right, so now Christine, we're working on the mannequin. It has the stand idle animation, and it's its default animation layer. And then it has its talking animation. So let's play it and let's see what's going on with this. Now it's still in that animation, or that idle animation, kind of staying in there, but you'll notice it's a subtle animation being added on. But you see how it's talking, it's kind of moving its head, it's bobbing around a little bit. That's the talking animation. And I've actually not tried this, but let's try adding on one more layer. Let's change it to additive. We'll call it, let's see, it is weight shift. And then it's this weight shift where it kind of shifts from one side to the other. And so I'll then drag in that FBX file. All right, so stand weight shift. So we really have multiple animations being used here. We actually have 3 animations going on. So it's still doing the talking, but then it's shifting its weight from one side to the other, and it also has the idle animation. Meanwhile, Christine is just running in place. All right, now, there's some other things to keep in mind is that when you've brought these in, so I brought in these weight shift and these talking animations. If I click on these clips over here, notice that they're additive now. This is talking, the stand weight shift is talking, the talking additive is also additive. If I wanted to have an override version of that, so if I wanted to have a talking override animation, I would have to take that same clip off my computer and add it to my assets panel. So if I did that, I can drag it down here. It is going to create its own assets panel, or its own asset pack. And it looks like it's the same animation, but you see how it's actually not. And so this is where we would advise to make sure that you're keeping track of how all these different animation files, and you're renaming them inside the editor accordingly. So if I add this one directly in, I want to make sure I know that this one is an override animation, not an additive animation like this other one was. So just some things to keep in mind. Are you able to animate the face with this new system? Oh, hello, Taylor. Animate the face. I don't know if you're asking about animate the host face. That would be more with something that would require customizable hosts. So Taylor, let me know what you're asking there. It's good to chat with you, my friend. Yes, I mean, so if you're talking about just like models with facial animations, yes. That's a good question. I will have to look into. I mean, as I know right now, we haven't opened up the hosts to be able to animate their individual faces. So I believe the answer is not yet. But let me get a definite answer on that. That's what I think is the right answer. Good question. Okay, so some things to keep in mind is that there's these different workflows as you're adding in different animations into your scene. It can get a little bit complex if you're just adding a bunch of different animations to your scene, and if you're not keeping track of which are additive and which are not, that's just something to keep in mind as you're approaching and starting to use animations as assets. We went to a pretty. Let's click on the animation here. We created a lot of. There we go. We went to some pretty great lengths to create some much more in-depth documentation than there was before. So let me just post that in the chat room. And with that, like this goes into a much more in-depth detail on how to approach animations as assets. Okay, so that is one other thing, and I think we've covered that. If you have any questions, please let me know in the chat room. If there's anything that I've not covered that we need to. Oh, deleting, one thing I mentioned is that if you want to delete something, remember, cannot delete talking override because at least one other object depends on it. So that's just something to keep in mind, is that deleting, and actually, now that I think about it, I didn't add that in there. Okay, so that is something that I myself would need to look at. But there's some documentation in here in terms of how to delete and work with dependencies, which is another important thing. Okay, so we've covered all that. I'm not showing my screen. Let me go back to showing my screen. And now we'll look at one other thing that is actually not a feature update, but is a new article that we've released. Now, this is actually a really exciting one. So my friend and colleague Leo Chan has put together this tutorial that's called Create Free Floating Text on Surface Textures in Amazon Sumerian. What does this exactly mean? One of the issues so far that people have been asking about is how do I create text and textures in VR or AR without just using images? Because there's just certain ways that the way VR works, it's adding really like a cutout within your scene and then putting in HTML elements. So it's difficult to actually make that work in VR. But this is a solution to allows you to use text, editable text in VR. There's a question. That's the best documentation I've ever seen. Seriously, good job. Thank you. I don't know how to pronounce your name. Kitfi? Thank you, though. I appreciate that. I will give props to the people that helped us put that together. Let me put this article also in the chat room. Oh, I forgot to say there we go. New article. Forgot to put up my title slide. We're talking about a new article. In the chat room, you can see it now. But what is this article? It's actually, it's a really, it's a really long script. And you can go through the article if you want. It gives kind of the mundane steps of how to create a script and all, but let me just show you. It's very simple. All you got to do is copy and paste this script, and let's just hide Christine and the mannequin for right now. And I'm going to create a new entity, and I'm just going to create a quad here. I'll add a new component. I'll add a script to this component, and I'm going to use the preview format. Just remember, anything that says legacy, well, if you have a legacy script, this is not a legacy script. This is a new script using the new scripting APIs, so make sure using the latest for that. So we will edit this script. There's nothing there, and I'm just going to copy and paste that very long script that we had. And once we do that, you see the quad has a bunch of properties that we can now edit. Now, if I press play, the best way to do it is actually to do it in play mode. See how it says surface text right there? That's because the background opacity is set to zero. So I can change the text color to be red or whatever I want. I can change the background color to be, do something like that. Bring up the opacity there. And you can actually, you can change it live. So we can say this is live text on a texture, okay? And you can do the different alignment. There we go. I didn't actually change anything. So you can do different alignment however you want, and there's different font families available. I will go, oh, I need to stop this. If you want to like use different fonts, let me show you just how to do that. So we'll actually go into the script and edit it, and then where is there? It's in here somewhere. Ah, okay, so there's different font families you can choose from. So type those in there, you can change it around. So if you want to use Arial, we can do that. Remember, you do have to press play to see those changes. Okay, so it's a really useful, helpful script that is now available. So if you want to create text, really useful for inside VR and AR experiences. It's a really helpful text. Of course, take that script, edit it, add to it, change it, show us what you're using with it. That'd be really cool to see as well. Okay. I think that covers the majority of everything. Remember that we do have a lot of these release notes that shows a lot of different things, software compatibility and hardware compatibility, fix all the different issues and improvements. Yeah, so make sure you're checking that out. There's some really helpful stuff in there. We want to make sure we're pointing customers to that because there's a lot of useful things that may have been fixed or that just let you know that we're working on. Because people do post in Slack sometimes like, hey, there's a bug, and we're like, oftentimes that's a known issue. If it's not, then we'll make sure that we add it to the release notes and let you know that we're working on things that we find or that you might find. All right, so that really covers it for this week, and we will be back probably next month. I don't know. November's a busy month. We'll be back with the next release and kind of show you some of the new stuff. We'll make that a regular topic. And would you mind posting that link in the chat for those of us who are lazy? Taylor, you bet, pal. I'll do it for you. Okay, this is the release notes. I should have done that before. There we go. Lots of different links, lots of different documentation to check out. We hope that is useful. Thanks again for watching, and we will see you all very soon. Let us know if you have any questions. Make sure you go to Sumerian, slack.sumerian.world. Check out our Slack channel and let us know if you have any questions, anything that we can help you with. We'd love to see also useful scenes and things that people are working on. So please post your projects and help us see them. We love sharing that and get excited about when customers are using Sumerian and showing off what they're creating. So let us see your creations. Let us know if you have any questions. We are here. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.